the cloud. Awesome. Thank you so much, everybody, for showing up today. I'm just so grateful that you've all decided that we're worthy to join today. And so today we've got Jon talking about how to work with leaders who go first. Co-host, wave your hands. You'll see us. And I'm going to just, you know what? I'm not going to have slides today because I'll just talk through it. So we're coaching Agile Journeys, and actually we've been around for more than 3 years now. When we started, we were like the only virtual meetup group for Agilists, and we decided to take a new take on topics that were just sort of out of the norm. So you can follow us on Twitter at Coaching Agile Joe, J-O, on also on Twitter, of course, coachingagilejourneys.com, where you probably may have registered for this. And then we made a partnership with Open Leadership Network, and you can visit openleadershipnetwork.com. I'll put the URLs in the chat later. So this is about continuing education and community for business leaders who want success with business agility transformation, and it's not the push kind. So the mission is just to advance the invitation-based change and key patterns of open business agility. So we're in partnership with Open Leadership Network, and Jon is really going to talk to us today about how do you work with leaders who go first? And it's this non-push way. And so it's just really super exciting stuff happening in the Agile community where we're talking about employee engagement and how to create lasting transformations, not just surface level transformations. And lastly, I will say we do all this on our own time and money. So if you believe in our stuff, just go to Coaching Agile Journeys and buy us some coffee, and we'd love to see your support there. And one last thing before I turn it over to Jon is our next session is going to be February 10th. Zach Bonacker is going to talk about Agile hiring. So you can find all our events again on coachingagilejourneys.com. So grateful to Jon. He's got extensive experience in Agile transformations, coaching leadership, and now he's going to talk to us about how we're going to work with those. So welcome, Jon. Thank you so much. So glad you're here.
Thank you, Heidi. It's such a pleasure to be here. And today's session is going to be a very interactive session using Lean Coffee. And to do Lean Coffee remotely, there's actually, maybe some of you have already experienced it, a tool called leancoffeetable.com. And so inside of that tool, we've pre-populated some of the cards that we could talk about. And Lori has just posted a link where you can join as a guest. You can just give yourself any name, and the coffee table board will appear right in front of you. And you'll see that there's about 21 different topics, 22 right now. You can create some topics, and we can vote on these topics. If there's anybody who's never experienced Lean Coffee, I'm just going to give about a 1-minute overview. But it's basically a democratically driven conversation. And you have 3 votes to cast. You could consider this that the topics are running for election. And so you vote with your dots, and the most popular topics go to the top of the stack. And we pull in one topic at a time. We talk about it for some short span of time, maybe 3 or 5 minutes. And then if we're done with the topic, it goes into the done column. If we want to give it an extension, there's another election. So we vote thumbs up or thumbs down. And it can get a new lease on life and maybe go for another 3 to 5 minutes. And Lori will be facilitating us. So if you're having trouble voting, I recommend using these kinds of hand signals throughout the Lean Coffee. Now, here's another thing. Lean Coffee has hand signs. I sometimes call them gang signs. I'm going to try an experiment with all of you today, which is to expand the lexicon of Lean Coffee gang signs. So sometimes when you have an idea, and you know we can only talk one at a time, there's I think about 20 of us now, could grow to something like 30 or 40 by the end of the hour. But I'm going to say maybe we can use our cameras, our webcams, to cue ourselves up. So if I want to talk next, I'll put a 1 into my camera like this. This means I have something to say. I'm going to wait till the speaker's done talking, and then I'm next. If somebody else wants to talk, then they can say, I'm 2. And then as obviously people take turns, we'll increment down. So the 2s become 1s, and the 3s become 2s. And if there's people who don't have webcams, we can be ambassadors for them by interspersing the people who want to talk, who don't have a webcam to keep track, by just inviting them. And then we'll just kind of keep the flow of conversation going until we've either run out of topics or run out of time. And that's Lean Coffee at scale in a nutshell. Does anybody have questions about Lean Coffee itself? Okay, cool. So then I'm going to invite you to start reading through all the topics on the left-hand column inside leancoffeetable.com. If you're not in there yet, I see a lot of people in there. Go ahead and get in there now. And if you're having trouble, you can maybe start texting, oh, I don't know, Lori or any other volunteers you might have the ability to contact. And I would say within about a minute or two, please go ahead and click on the vote lettering. It's teal lettering in the lower left-hand corner of each one of the cards under the topic column. You can cast all 3 of your votes in one card or spread them across 2 or 3. So go ahead and start doing that now. And I'll be silent unless you have questions for me before you vote. And by the way, yes, we're recording. I think I'm going to vote.
You deserve at least 3 votes.
Yeah. If I could swing it, I would log in twice and use 6. Not that coordinated. So I see only 2 people who have used no votes. And I'm going to ask, well, now there's 3 people. Some people are probably joining just this moment. So I'll count you down, Lakshmi and RS and KP. You've got about 10 seconds before we actually stack rank by popularity the topics that are most popular. Oh, and Scott Watts, welcome. You've got about 10 seconds to cast your votes across these 21 cards, which are topics. Feel free to just pile them on to whatever catches your eye, or be a little bit more judicious, but we're about to start to stack rank that topic column. Just a few more seconds. And Lori, I'm guessing you know which button to push.
On the to stack the cards.
Yeah, there's a sort button.
Okay.
Just take your time and read slowly from the bottom to from the top to bottom.
Yes.
Oh, you found it? Okay, cool. Bingo. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead. Actually, I can't. Lori, could you pull in the Agile Fluency Model sticky and or card? And let's jump into that topic with whatever you think is reasonable. 3 minutes, 5 minutes, something like that.
Maybe start with 5.
Okay, sounds good to me. Okay, so here's the thing about the Agile Fluency Model. It's a board game, and it's amazingly popular. And the thing with me is, okay, so I was working with the good folks at Project Brilliant, and they were all decided to go, you have to get trained by somebody that's either empowered by Diana Larson or James Shore, or by them personally, in order to even buy the board game. And then once you've been through their 2-day training, you can buy the board game is included with the training cost, and then you can play it. But the thing about me is I'm a worrywart. And so I was totally worried that the CIO, who is the sponsor of this Agile Transformation engagement that I'm in, and their executives would just completely poo-poo it as soon as they find out that it's a board game. So after a lot of hand-wringing, I finished this assessment that ran about 2 months. And then as the wrap-up of the assessment, just as we were about to give the recommendation for coaching, we played this board game, which is the Agile Fluency Model board game. And they absolutely loved it. Like, they didn't want to stop playing. As soon as we finished the first game, they're like, hey, can we do it again? Hey, can you leave it here? We want to play it more. We want all the development teams to play it. So it was this huge success, and all of my worrying that they might feel like I'm making light of what's at stake here, or that I'm oversimplifying or anything, all of that worrying was for naught. And so my personal practice is whenever I go in, especially when I'm the first Agile coach to be speaking with executive leadership, I'm going to really insist that we play the Agile Fluency Model board game. Because A, I know they're going to love it. B, they're going to discover things about the system that they work in that they probably never considered. And C, it's going to put the learning in their hands. They become responsible from that moment for what they learn. So who has some questions about the Agile Fluency Model and the Agile Fluency Board Game?
I actually do, John.
Yeah.
Can you give an example of what one of the questions is, or how the game is played?
Absolutely. So there's these practices that you can choose to master, and basically pull into the board, and you spend currency on it because time is money and teams have a burn rate. And there's a bunch of different practices. For example, having a team room is a practice. Doing paired programming is a practice. You can imagine maybe 20 different practices that, whether you're doing Scrum or whether you're doing Kanban, they're universal practices that Agile practitioners have described over the years. And depending on the sequence in which you adopt these practices, your ability to create and maintain working software will be very, very different. If you run out of the bandwidth, meaning money, if you run out of the bandwidth to just maintain your existing code stack, basically the team goes bust, the business goes bust, and you're out of the game. So not blowing yourself up by misspending your team's effort is part of winning the game, if you will.
Okay.
And I noticed we had somebody waiting to ask another question.
Yeah, John, this is Thane. I was wondering, how would you do this if the leadership team itself were distributed remote?
Oh, so how would you play the Agile Fluency game remotely?
Yeah, I tend to run into this problem a lot because I have a lot of things where there are cards and things like that, and yet I'm tending to work more and more with remote teams that are in multiple places, and these things all fall apart.
It's a really good question, and I don't have a ready answer, but I do know that there's a community. So once you become a trained facilitator in the Agile Fluency game and Agile Fluency model, they welcome you into this online community. I think it's a Google group. Oh, so that was our prompt. Do we want to give this topic life, or do we want to call it quits? So go ahead and make your votes now. Thumb up or thumb down.
Can it be sideways?
You can be sideways.
Yeah.
It's a majority for end. So I think this is where we say 5. Yeah. So this is done. Maybe you can follow up with me later, and I'll tell you more about the
That's okay. Thank you.
Fabulous. Next one up is clear leadership. This is one of my favorite topics because it's actually something that I've discovered fairly lately. And there's a book called Clear Leadership, and its author is a gentleman in Canada named Professor Gervais Bush. And he has a 2 or 3 day training. There's about 100 other certified trainers. You get a pretty good gist of what it is by reading the book, but essentially it's about speaking with transparency and not necessarily like throwing away all of your feelings, your emotions, but rather not necessarily emoting while you're describing your feelings. It has many similarities, in my opinion, to nonviolent communication, or NVC. It encourages people to be very explicit about what their concerns are, what their perceptions of what people are doing is, trying not to project or place blame, and trying not to assign motive, because we can't really know people's motives unless we ask them and they tell us. So it represents an ordered approach to conversation where maybe conflict is arising or people have growing concerns. And I think that the benefits include, without limitation, transparency and psychological safety. And the way that the book describes it in practice is that it's actually used in boardrooms amongst executives or other higher ranking corporate officials. So this is something that I think probably any Agile business, Agile development team, or group of managers or executives would really benefit by. And so the way that I will infuse this into my practice is I hold something called a mastermind group. I'm just curious, by show of hands in your webcam, who knows what I mean by a mastermind group? Has anybody heard of mastermind groups? Okay, so mastermind groups, I learned about this from a master contractor that I worked for who had been trained in the John Maxwell School of Coaching. And I've also subsequently met other people who are not necessarily in Agile, but do transformations of companies, maybe lean transformations or things like that. And they also are acquainted with mastermind groups as a sort of vehicle for Agile transformation. So it's a group of people that have similar interests. So it could be something like an Agile transformation office or center of excellence, whatever they're calling themselves. But the thing is that they read a book and then they talk about how what they're learning from the book, they're applying to their lives. And so discussing predominantly things about work, but maybe even things in their private life, and they basically coach each other. So it's like a coaching circle or a coaching triangle based on a specific reading to acquire new skills or new practices. And so I'm going to infuse Clear Leadership as one of the books that we read inside of a mastermind group. And just for your reference, I've traditionally been using things like The Responsibility Process by Dr. Christopher Avery as the subject matter of the mastermind group. And then also make these completely optional. So you don't get assigned to a mastermind group. Somebody offers attendance to one and you self-select in order to join a mastermind group. And it meets regularly, like maybe once a week for an hour or an hour and a half. And you become accountability partners for each other and things like that. It introduces the entire construct of coaching to people who probably only know coaching inside the context of an athletic coach. What else would you like to know about Clear Leadership? Should we call this one done? Okay, cool. And
We only had 28 seconds left.
Yep. Let's burn it down. Just kidding. Okay, the next one is open assessments, communities of practice, the traveler, picks you, and quitting. Cool. So in my particular client's case, as we're looking to help executive leaders, so directors, vice presidents, the CIO, help everybody start to learn what is, let's see, am I on the right topic? It disappeared, the card went away. If I'm remembering the topic that I thought I saw, so they decided that they didn't necessarily have time to go to a 2-day training in Scrum, and they would self-study. And scrum.org has these open assessments, meaning free, anybody can take it online at any time. It's throwaway, you don't get certification, but you do get feedback on how well you understand Scrum. So within the course of one single sprint, which in our case was 2 weeks long, they would take this open assessment until they passed. And they would have to get 8 questions out of something like 30 questions. They have to get 80% or higher correct in order to pass. And some people, they had never experienced anything like Scrum before, even though my client had been doing it for about 2 years. So they said, hey, John, can you spend some time with me? And in the course of about an hour and a half, I went through what could be something like a, I don't know, maybe a 10-minute presentation on Scrum to help them understand. And I used cards like these. This is the increment, definition of done, sprint goal, daily Scrum, sprint backlog. You get the idea. I've got about 21 cards. This is complex. And I walked them through it, and they were able to go online and do the PSPO open assessment and pass. And all the members of the, no, I should say 80% of the members of this executive leadership Scrum team were able to pass in less than 2 weeks. Wow. The communities of practice is a topic inside of this card, which was they had taken their functional silos and relabeled them communities of practice and headed them by managers. And this was like the elephant in the room. I just mentioned, like, I happen to notice that there's no substantive difference between the QA department and the QA community of practice. Correct me if I'm wrong. And the answer was, no, you're not wrong. So I said, okay, great. Would you like to examine maybe what's possible inside of the construct of a community of practice where nobody's in charge of the community of practice permanently as part of their positional authority, and maybe what you got going right now? That conversation really grew into the product backlog of the Agile transformation. And part of it was triggered by going into the open assessments, really learning what a cross-functional team is, and not having somebody's manager on their own Scrum team, and that would carry through into communities of practice. So it got interesting. And from the conversion of the communities of practice from silos into actual communities, the concept of traveler, which is a subject matter expert, came up. And I borrow this term. This comes from large scale Scrum or less. And it's somebody who basically temporarily embeds in a Scrum team to impart their specific knowledge, and then moves on to another Scrum team to keep on diffusing this field specific knowledge that they have. And we'd done that at a former employer that I had called PIX Auditing. And we called it PIX U, or PIX University. And it was essentially a place where people could come to acquire field specific knowledge without making that like their full-time job. And so quitting cold turkey, the silos, if it's challenging, maybe using community of practice, the traveler, open assessments, or your company's name here, university, as someplace they can go to acquire new skills, is a more gradual transition. Just an idea. How does that land with all of you?
That is interesting. I like the traveler idea.
Mhm. It's also an option. Yeah, go ahead.
I was just going to say, is that more of a consultative role that that person would play as opposed to a coaching role? So is it more about the kind of the mentoring aspect of it? I'm just keen to hear a little bit more on it, because it's a bit similar to what I'm doing at the moment, traveling between teams, but I'm doing it in more of a coaching capacity as opposed to a traveler capacity. So I'm intrigued.
I could have the idea totally wrong, and so Craig Larman would be the one to, I think, ask definitively. I was trained on LESS for 3 days by Craig, and he described it as similar to the language lawyer that you'd hear about in XP. And the way that he described it to me was that they literally embed into the team and do the work of making working software until they've satisfied themselves that the skill's has been effectively transferred. They won't need to come back to transfer that skill again. And Lori, I think you're number one.
Yes, well, our time is up on this topic. I'm not sure what happened when I pulled it over. So do we want to take a vote on whether we want to extend or not? Okay, so thumbs up if we want to extend, thumbs down if we want to end.
I see thumbs up. I don't see thumbs down. Okay.
I'll add 2 minutes, and I'm keeping time with my phone. So.
Super. So then, Stuart, you had a finger up.
So I used to work with Bass and Craig. So your understanding is correct. It's basically moving away from a focus on specialist roles where you don't have enough people, so you don't have enough people to go in the teams, and therefore you try and disperse knowledge, on a sprint by sprints, event by event basis. So it's very different to coaching.
Mm-hmm. And I would offer that reserving this role for managers who actually like doing the work of making working software, but possibly took a promotion, in air quotes, a promotion to a manager role because there was higher pay involved. If you're in a client site where it's okay to leave the people manager track and go into an individual contributor track without a reduction in pay, becoming a traveler sometimes looks very attractive to people who want to be ex-managers or former managers. Among other roles, there's probably, my last count is about eight new roles that managers can evacuate to. Any other questions about this one? Then let's go ahead and pull in the next card. So no limits self-management. This is the name of some training that is offered inside the Open Leadership Network by the person who, in my opinion, is best qualified. The book Beyond Empowerment, and I think the new book is No Limits Self-Management. Somebody help me, because I'm actually forgetting the name. Doug Kirkpatrick. Thank you. Doug Kirkpatrick is both the author of these books, Beyond Empowerment and No Limits Self-Management, as well as the trainer of the course. And in the course, he mentions his experience in Morningstar Corporation, which is completely self-managed. Everybody is a manager of their work and answers to the boss, which is only the mission of the company. The CEO is not the boss, and they have their own framework for enabling this self-management, which I won't go into now, but I will say that when I asked how Chris Ruffer got the idea to turn his Morningstar Corporation into a self-organized corporation, Doug Kirkpatrick pulled out a manila folder, quite literally, and said, actually, it has to do with coaching. And that was one of the things he says, we're going to create a coaching culture. Well, where did that come from? Well, it has to do with Chris Ruffer being a very big enthusiast of executive coaching and specifically polarity coaching as it is practiced by Peter Kustenbaum. Peter Kustenbaum is the author of many books and has been doing coaching as well as teaching courses in applied philosophy applied in business for something like 40 years. Peter is about 90, I think he's 93 or 95 years old, still practicing, still coaching. But the point is that this polarity coaching, or what I'm calling polarity coaching, I don't know if Peter calls it that, is where the executive or the manager is constantly balancing these two competing interests, where one is what to do in the here and now, and the other is what to do in the future, strategic. And then that was the horizontal axis. On the vertical axis, you've got look after my own self-interests, self-maintenance, and the other is take care of people in the organization, people in the world, customers, stakeholders, etc. And so as you're vacillating between those two polarities on both axes, it starts to describe a pattern, which could be maybe like a figure 8. And so as I was learning this from Doug Kirkpatrick in the training, it really turned me on to Peter Kustenbaum, because Peter Kustenbaum now, I would guess he probably only coaches Fortune 500 executives. And my interest is working with leaders, because historically I saw that neglecting to coach the leaders of an organization leads to mostly futility in agile transformation endeavors. And what I found was an absolute gold mine. And so I would recommend actually reading the book by Peter Kustenbaum that Doug Kirkpatrick recommends, and I'm going to botch the title, but I encourage anybody to go on Amazon and start searching Peter Kustenbaum's work. I think it's called Leadership and Self-Management in the Organization, something like that. It's a thick book with a white cover. It's got a fantastic chapter on determinism versus creativity, I guess you'd call it. Let's see. No, it's not leadership, inner greatness, philosophy of leaders, but Peter Kustenbaum is obviously a leader in that field. Maybe I'll follow up later after this meeting's over. But anyways, Peter Kustenbaum and Peter Block co-authored this book. And any of you who know Peter Block's writing, it's really great. If you're going to coach leaders, meaning executives in large corporations, that's it. Freedom and accountability at work. Yeah, that's the book. Lauren, yes? Ready to move on? Okay, we're done with that one. Cool. And I can't see, I can't dismiss the counting pop-up, so I can't see what's the next slide. There it is, okay. Next one up is Cartman drama triangle. So the Cartman drama triangle has been around since as early as the 1950s. Transaction analysis is a contemporary field to Cartman drama triangle. And I discovered the Cartman drama triangle through Caitlin Walker's work in systemic modeling, systemic team modeling, and also clean language. Besides the treatment that Caitlin Walker's group in clean language gives it, there's also something called the power of TED. Turns out it's actually, there are many books written on the Cartman drama triangle and how to dismantle it. But essentially, well, actually I should probably ask, who here has never heard of the Cartman drama triangle? Okay. I want to invite somebody to speak besides me, somebody who maybe has some exposure, to give like a 1-minute introduction. Have any volunteers? Okay, so I'll give my version. In our lives, generally speaking, when something happens that we didn't want to have happen, so an unpleasant surprise happens in a relationship in our life, we tend to think of ourselves as a victim of circumstance, or a victim, yeah, oh nice, there we go, thank you, Heidi. So a victim of somebody else misconduct. And so we then start to, in our mind at least, maybe we don't say so, but we start to think of the person that's responsible for turning us into a victim as a villain. And of course, the irony of this is that nobody in this world that I've ever heard of, in their own story about life, cast themselves as the villain in the story. But when somebody is being accused of being a villain or doing something wrong, immediately they become the victim. And the thing about victims is that they become a magnet for heroes to come rescue. And everybody's got friends. When you've got a friend that's claiming that they're being victimized by a villain, first thing you're going to do is try to help them. And so what that means is that you're taking on the role of rescuer or hero, if you will. And you start to buy into this story that somebody is a villain that needs to be shut down or set straight or whatever the case may be. And ironically, that perpetuates this cycle of somebody becoming a victim and somebody becoming the villain and somebody becoming the rescuer. And just by knowing that that is a generally pervasive pattern of human behavior helps you to start thinking about ways that you could be more overt, say what you're actually thinking, inviting people to dismantle the triangle with you, and maybe even putting yourself in a new role that's more powerful. So the power of TED is where we say, okay, let's dismantle the toxicity of this triangle. Instead of being a victim, what's the polar opposite that I could be of that? Well, you could be a creator. If you're the creator of your own life, or at least the creator of your own actions and your own words, maybe you could be the creator of a relationship that goes the way that you'd like to have things happen. And other people, maybe who you're casting in this role of villain or rescuer, maybe you could cast them in different roles so that they have more power and less toxicity too, to each other. And the thing that I did to help make this real for my clients is I got out some blue tape and I put it on the floor. And I had them stand in a corner that was labeled either villain or victim or rescuer and talk about how they feel being in that role. And then imagining what they would say in that role versus something that's totally the opposite, like creator. And by sort of rehearsing this, by going through and inventing new scripts, authoring a new dialogue, they're actually training for the real world. And this is all happening, by the way, inside of a specific mastermind cohort in one of our meetings. So the challenge is, after the exercise, great. Now, can you go and introduce Cartman Drama Triangle to the people outside of the mastermind group, either who report to you or don't report to you, so that they can do this with each other? And now we've created viral growth. More, done, more, done. Cool, done. Next one. Fast, agile, flow, tame flow, and open Kanban. So what's the similarity between these? Anybody want to guess? Why are they all on the same card? So they're on the same card because they are all not frameworks for work systems that are commonly known and used, such as Lean Kanban University's version of Kanban, or Scrum Alliance, Scrum.org version of Scrum. These are novel frameworks which are recently emerging and which actually are really good to have as options for a leadership team that just doggone doesn't want to do Scrum or doggone doesn't want to do LKU Kanban. And the reason I bring this up is, so I introduced Leadership Scrum, which is a fork on Scrum. As many of you know, Scrum is an open source social technology, which means as long as I give attribution, I don't have to pay money to anybody or ask permission from anybody to introduce it to my client. And I co-authored a defining document of Leadership Scrum with Daniel Mezek and Mark Sheffield a couple of years ago. And so I can also fork it if I decide to. And if I decide to fork it by blending it with something like, oh, I don't know, Tame Flow, or I don't know if Tame Flow is open source, Fast Agile, which I know is open source, then I can go ahead and do that. So one of the things about Leadership Scrum that I encountered, and stop me if this sounds familiar, is the executives go, well, John, we've got day jobs, as you remember. I'm an executive. I have to go to meetings and stuff. How am I going to do both? How do I account for that in our velocity or in our capacity? Blah, blah, blah. And besides, our leadership initiatives, which are basically the equivalent of stories or features or epics, but changing the organization to be more agile, our leadership initiatives, like we knock those things out in, a week or two. So if, we're spinning up, a team just to do that, then this will be very short. Well, now we're at the point of splitting our Scrum team, this leadership Scrum team, and they might spin up a small team just for, I don't know, 3 weeks, 4 weeks, 6 weeks, or maybe even less. And Fast Agile is magic when it comes to spinning up a very small team, maybe only 3 people for like 2 or 3 days. And so since I have these patterns that are assembled into a framework with Fast Agile, I can offer that as an option. Would you like to leave Leadership Scrum and go into something like Fast Agile at the leadership level? Because you get to shake the snow globe of who's on which teams every 3 days. You get to pull in a new piece of backlog every 3 days and retro every 3 days instead of every 2 weeks. And so having something like that in your back pocket to pull out when the time's needed makes it more of a democratically driven, self-determined thing, because they're choosing from options rather than taking the one-trick pony that you can offer. Offering more options is a good thing, and I remember hearing this a lot from Mike Beadle, and I think also David J. Anderson. It's always good to be able to have the power to pick from a pool of options. So why shouldn't we be going and getting more options for our clients to give them the freedom to choose? Down to 1 minute or a question?
No, I have a question actually.
Sure.
Can you give an example of what is a piece of backlog that you would pull into a Fast Agile flow?
Sure, anything really. So in the case of Ron Cortell, who authored this framework, he said for some reason, which I don't recall, Scrum was not working. And they knew that the one thing that they knew was they didn't want to keep doing Scrum. And I think it had to do with the disparate skill sets, that specific features needed that only one person had, and the team was already larger than like 9 people, it was around 17 or 18. So it was a feature in working software. I think he was working for a healthcare company that needed some electronic platform, and that's what they pulled it in for. We need to vote to extend, or are we done? And there is somebody queued up for a question.
Someone said, please close your thoughts on it.
Yep. So we're done with that one. And by the way, before the meeting's over, I think we wanted to pull in something that talked about a very important event coming up. I'll go ahead and pull that in now. So there, in a few weeks' time, there is an event February 4 to 6 in Tampa, Florida, for the Open Leadership Network, which is also brought to us by the Coaching Agile Journey group. Lori, if you want to say a few words about that before we move on, that would be a perfect time.
Sure. Well, first of all, Coaching Agile Journeys is so excited to be partnered with Open Leadership Network. They are sponsoring this event today. And I know that Heidi, you and Kristen are both going to the symposium, right?
Yeah, I can share a little bit more about that if you wish. So I'm going to post the URL here, but basically the things that Jon is talking about are things that people will be teaching and doing at the Open Leadership Symposium in Tampa. So it's a really cool, it's not a very expensive event. And I think we have a 50% off code. Jon, if you, otherwise I can paste it here and look it up when I'm done speaking for the 50% off code. But so the challenge is, instead of having these rigid push frameworks, and now Jon is talking about these different principles, how do we bring them into action? And that's what the Open Leadership Network and the symposium is all about. And there's an open space event on the 5th, and then the 4th and the 6th, they have 2 full days of training, and then you can select your training. So Kristen Hernandez and I are going to be teaching on Agile Open Practitioner, which is basically, if you're a Scrum Master and you're on a team and you don't want to push and force your team to do Scrum, and like Jon said, what if it's not the right thing, but your name is a Scrum Master, then how do you help them grow as a team instead of pushing practices? And so our training is all about that and how to grow a self-organizing team without pushing practices. Doug Kirkpatrick's going to be there, and a lot of more awesome people from the community. So head over to that link. And that's about it. I hear the coffee pouring.
Yep. Cool. I think we're done. Or let's see.
I think we had one question from Stuart, though.
Yes, we do.
I can just add on to that. So the same event will happen in London, the UK, 1st, 2nd, 3rd of June. I can't tell you who will be there yet, but we're going to do a similar thing. It will be the open space on the first day, and then we're going to have 2 days, probably of half-day workshops with some full-day workshops. So there'll be a good mixture, again, based around a lot of these things that Jon's talking about, from people like Doug, Caitlin, etc. Again, I don't know who yet, but a lot of those people we hope will be available, and some others.
That's awesome. Thank you.
Absolutely. So do we want to take in one last card, or should we wrap up right here? What would you like to do as a group?
I'm good with one more.
I propose one more card.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay.
Good. Other people are saying one more card. Cool.
Nice. Borrowing from less, Scrum at Scale, and Nexus. Great. So this is where I'm at right now. The client essentially is seeing that we're too large of an executive team to be calling ourselves a Scrum team. And there is a need for us to start bringing the pieces together of the Agile transformation that are happening in different pockets of the organization. And the way that we operate right now, we're distributed. The executive team has some folks in Europe, some folks in Asia, and some folks in North America. And adopting the practices from, or all the practices from any one of these frameworks is going to be very challenging. I know which way we're leaning towards, but I can't say where we're really going to land. And so essentially offering, there's a Scrum at Scale guide, there's a Nexus guide. I don't know if there's a less guide, and this is where I'd actually love to hear what Stuart or other people that are more experienced with less than I am guide me. But the idea is to give them the options and let them explore, even if that means picking and choosing. Of course, we know many of these frameworks say, listen, it's not the framework if you borrow pieces. Fine, they would lose that. no guarantees of, past performance. However, it does seem like a gradual introduction is what the executive team that I'm looking at right now prefers. So what about less? Does it have some kind of a defining document that's, say, under 30 pages?
No, there's no document. There is the LESS website, which is fairly definitive. Effectively, they have a page for each part or section. There's a lot on there.
Yeah, I'm thinking that I'll send them there. It's a compromise, of course. If I had the resources, if they had the time to go to the full 3 days training, I'd love to send them to that. And I know there's also, people do introductions of LESS that are like maybe 1 day long as opposed to 3. There's
a certified LESS basics, which people like me are authorized to give. But there aren't that many of those, I don't think.
Are LESS basics always in person, or do they do them online sometimes?
As far as I know, they're in person. I would have to check whether it has to be in person or not. But you could always do it, without you're now CLB qualified, and just get the knowledge, the content.
Yeah. Yeah. So I think, more and more, well, I don't know what the future holds. I believe that it's not a coincidence that most of the executives that I talk to are not willing to monolithically flip. Maybe I should take that back. I did have an executive who wanted to flip his company in its entirety the day that he was presented with an option of doing Scrum at scale. I didn't advise him to flip it abruptly like that, but that's something that I think we all need to be considering when we have the ear and the trust of the CEO, that when on an impulse they're saying, yeah, let's start doing that like in the next 5 minutes, everybody in the company, helping them to appreciate how much complexity is involved and how in the short term failure is almost inescapable. Getting comfortable with failure while you're saying we're going to flip all at once, this whole pancake, not part of it. I wonder how that strikes you all. Do you see creating hybrids, or cherry picking is probably what I should say, cherry picking practices from frameworks and doing things monolithically versus doing things incremental implementation of a framework?
I can speak for myself, and I've had great success introducing things incrementally. I introduced Kanban in a company, and there was just it was distributed, so there was no way we could all go to training. And so, yeah, I introduced it incrementally.
Yeah, we get an extend. I think there's nothing wrong with incrementally adopting a framework, an Agile framework. And the only caveat is keep yourself honest to, if we say we're going to start off in partial adoption, headed towards complete adoption, then have some sort of a checklist, some sort of an assessment criterion where you can say you're getting closer or you're going farther away. And that's where these defining documents like the Scrum Guide or the Leadership Scrum Guide or the Fast Agile Guide or the core protocols and core commitments, which we haven't talked about, but it is a very succinct list to say, this is the mirror that I think you said you wanted to look in. And here's where I see you making progress, or here's where I see you devolving. What do you want to do about that? Is a coaching question that I don't fail to have, regardless of how well I think that conversation is going to go over or not. And so far, so good. I would say probably my client is as stringent in their application of these defining documents to their actual practice as I would be, maybe more. But without that defining document, it can turn into a lot of churn, a lot of swirl around, well, where are we? How are we really doing? It sounds like it's all just a subjective, opinion-based conversation. So again, the Agile Fluency Model can bring in some structure to that conversation because there's a finite set of very specific Agile practices that you play with as physical pieces on a board. And again, to me, these pieces in the game are just metaphor. And when we're talking about practices, which by and large are abstract constructs, so they're intangible, making the thing tangible so that it's visible and we can have a more productive conversation is the key. So that was my takeaway from it all.
Thank you. Cool. So we only have about 4 minutes left. So any questions or comments or thoughts, because we don't have time to take a full other topic, but anyone have any thoughts about how they enjoyed the session, how they liked it, or any other comments or questions for Jon? No, you answered all their questions.
Yay. Yay, thank you. It's been a wonderful conversation for me. Thank you all for your participation.
Yeah, thank you so much. So the recording will be posted on our website in a few days, and reach out to me on LinkedIn if you have questions about Open Leadership Symposium or anything else, have issues registering. And thank you so much for attending this session. Thanks, Jon, for your time. Super appreciate it.
Thank you, Jon.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye.
Thank you.